RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Good afternoon, I'm Evie Ashton. The government has laid bare the huge shortages in the country's health workforce and its plan to fix them. The health workforce plan says an estimated 1,600 more health professionals will be needed every year until 2032 to keep up with population growth. Our political reporter Giles Dexter has more.
The six-point plan lays out what the government intends to do over the next year to improve recruitment and retention in the health system. It includes more earn-while-you-learn schemes for students, better well-being support for existing staff, and trying to coax back New Zealanders working overseas. The Health Minister, Dr Aisha Verrill, says the shortfall is confronting, but now the government knows the gaps, it can get on with plugging them. But National says it's too little too late, and the shortfall is down to mistakes of the government's own making.
Athletics New Zealand won't answer questions over the resignation of high-performance coach Jeremy McCall. The former coach of Olympic pole vault medalist Eliza McCartney has been banned from any involvement in the sport in New Zealand for 10 years for serious misconduct. Delphine Herbert reports.
An independent investigation has found McCall sent offensive text and social media messages, some of which included sexual references and were sent to athletes who were minors. It found he failed to adequately manage injuries and made inappropriate comments to athletes during training. In a statement, he has apologised and accepted his behaviour was harmful. High Performance Sport New Zealand says it's been working with Athletics New Zealand to ensure the safety and well-being of the athletes involved. A police investigation is also underway.
Emergency services say Twitter's new interim viewing limits won't stop important messages from getting to the public. Twitter owner Elon Musk has announced those with paid accounts can see up to 10,000 tweets, while free users are limited to 1,000 or fewer. Met Services Head of Communications Lisa Murray says emergency information is available on multiple platforms, and police, ambulance and fire and emergency all told RNZ Twitter is just one platform they use. Meanwhile, Facebook company Meta has today announced it will soon launch a rival to Twitter to be called Threads. Palestinian officials say about 3,000 people have fled their homes in the Jenin refugee camp since Israel launched a major military operation in the occupied West Bank. Hundreds of Israeli troops have been involved, supported by airstrikes and armoured bulldozers. The Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, calls Jenin a haven for terrorism. His words are translated.
Our forces are eliminating terrorists, they're arresting wanted persons, they're destroying headquarters and seizing many weapons.
Palestinian politicians have described Israel's action as an invasion. Russia says it's intercepted at least 3 drones in the skies over the Moscow region. Flights at the capital's Vnukovo airport are reported to have been stopped. Japan is set to begin pumping out more than 1 million tonnes of treated water from the destroyed Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant this summer, a process that will take decades to complete. The water was distilled after being contaminated from contact with fuel rods at the reactor, destroyed in the 2011 earthquake. The Prime Minister has congratulated New Zealand's record-breaking Special Olympics team. Team representatives visited the PM's office this afternoon. Chris Hipkins says they'd represented New Zealand really well.
We're incredibly proud of you as a country, and it's great to be able to have you at the Beehive to congratulate you in person. It's good to see you all back here in New Zealand. I know Kiwis have been following your competitions really closely.
39 athletes secured more than 30 medals at the Games in Berlin. In other sport, New Zealand football's request for a FIFA investigation into racism has stalled. Last month, the All Whites refused to return to the field for the second half of their game against Qatar after defender Michael Boxall was allegedly subjected to a racial slur by the opposition. The FIFA Disciplinary Committee has acknowledged the request, but New Zealand Football Chief Executive Andrew Pragnell says they're still waiting to hear back about the next step.
Submitted a whole lot of evidence from our side, and I expect there will be some more requests from FIFA, but this might take a while. A judicial process, if you like, and so have to, of course, in terms of getting a good outcome can take a while. I certainly think it's not days.
Meanwhile, interim All Whites coach Darren Baisley has been confirmed in the role on a permanent basis. Baisley will lead the national men's side for the 2026 World Cup qualifying and the men's under-23 side for the Paris Olympic campaign. And All Blacks first five Richie Mo'unga says they've taken a simple approach to training this week ahead of the Rugby Championship opener against Argentina in Mendoza. Mo'unga says it's important in the first test of the year to get the basics right.
Things that we know that should be in our DNA in terms of footy, carry height and lightning quick ball at the ruck, and just little things that we pride ourselves on that I think is a real good focus to have as your first test.
The test is on Sunday morning. That's the news. A Kiwi wins in the streets of Chicago.
He comes to the checkered flag.
An umpire's call causes a slap.
There was nothing more certain than the British Prime Minister getting involved. It does indicate that this has been taken to a whole new level.
And a duck takes up residence in a cricket ground.
Sort of decided to go for a little fly, and this place looks pretty good. There's a lot of green grass here.
The early bird gets the news. Morning report, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
And we're funded through New Zealand On Air. You're back with Lisa on Checkpoint next. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Wednesday. From Northland to Mamawatu. Also, Coromandel Peninsula and the Central High Country. Cloudy periods, isolated showers. Southwest gales in exposed places, easing tomorrow morning. Bay of Plenty, Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Waidadapa. Also, Horowhenua, Kapiti Coast and Wellington. Fine, apart from a few areas of cloud and Bay of Plenty and a chance of an evening shower in the Taradua district tomorrow. Westerly gales in exposed places, easing tomorrow morning. Bulla and Westland, a few showers north of Hokitika, mainly fine in the south. Fine weather for Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury and central Otago. For the remainder of Otago, Southland and Fiordland, occasional showers. West to southwest gales in exposed places. Severe for a time about Clutha, Dunedin and North Otago, easing tomorrow morning. And for Kohu, Chatham Islands, showers, possibly heavy and thundery this afternoon. Strong to gale westerlies. It's 7 minutes past 5. I will have traffic news and headlines for you at around 20 past 5. Ngā mihi iwi, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint te tēnā rā, ko Lisa Owen pēnei. A high-performance athletics coach has been banned from working in Aotearoa for a decade after admitting harassing and mistreating athletes, including minors. Jeremy McCall, who previously coached star pole vaulters Eliza McCartney and Olivia McTaggart, has resigned from his job after accepting allegations of serious misconduct. Athletics New Zealand says a number of complaints were made about him in May this year. An independent investigation has subsequently found McCall had mistreated athletes, including failing to adequately manage injuries. It also found evidence of harassment, inappropriate communication through social media and text, including inappropriate sexual references, aggravated by the fact a number of the sports people were minors, and the behaviour was over a number of years. Athletics New Zealand says it's also aware of reports that Jeremy McCall is being investigated by the police. It has applauded the courage of those who spoke up and apologised to the athletes for the harm they have suffered. Well, joining us now is Holly Thorpe, a Professor of Sport and Gender at the University of Waikato. Kia ora, Holly, how does this happen again after, recent investigations into athletes' welfare? Here we are again.
Kia ora, Lisa. Yes, it's very serious and heartbreaking, to realise and to be learning about the harm and trauma that these sportswomen have endured and will for some time to come, I'm sure. As you say, it's another case. We've seen over the last few years reviews into cycling and rowing and gymnastics and football and rugby and now athletics, where we've got male coaches, abusing their power over female athletes. It's just all too common, and we've got a problem here. When we connect the dots, I think we need to recognise that real change needs to happen, and quickly, in Aotearoa.
So, what responsibility do the professional organisations like Athletics New Zealand and High Performance New Zealand need to take?
Yes, I think The national sports organisations absolutely need to be doing all they can, but I think we need, across New Zealand, urgently, we need an independent body for safeguarding and duty of care. We need safeguarding policies and procedures so that athletes all have, access to a safe and healthy environment that is free of harassment and abuse. And if something is going on, they can report it in a way that they feel safe to do so that action happens quickly, rather than waiting years and years for athletes to feel safe to, or they're just at breaking point where they actually express their concerns.
Various codes do have welfare organisations for the players, but do you think there needs to be some national overriding body?
Yes, and so last year on June 14th, Grant Robertson announced that there would be an integrity working group. That's still in motion, is my understanding, and we won't be seeing real signs of that coming into being until next year. But we need that now, and we need real nationwide leadership in terms of safeguarding of our athletes.
So Checkpoint approached the following people and groups for interviews: Athletics New Zealand, the CEO and the chair of the board; High Performance Sport New Zealand, Raylene Castle, and the author of the report into the Jeremy McCall investigation. All of them declined interviews. What does that say about transparency?
It's obviously sensitive topics, but we need to be connecting the dots here. We need to be recognising that we've got a systemic problem. And it's, often here what we're seeing again and again is gender-based interpersonal violence between male coaches and female athletes. This is just far too common. It's happening internationally. Countries around the world are, more and more of these cases are coming to light. And, some countries are demonstrating real leadership in terms of, trying to move faster and safeguarding policies and procedures. And I think New Zealand needs to catch up here.
Is a 10-year ban from coaching enough when you think about the consequences of this person's actions, including things like not managing injuries properly for athletes? That's kind of career-ending and life-changing for those athletes involved. So 10-year ban, is that enough as a consequence?
Well, absolutely. Lifelong trauma and harm is being done to these athletes, and that's, 10 years sounds like a long time, and people are saying that is unprecedented in terms of what we've seen in Aotearoa, but actually, if that coach is going back in 10 years, that's a little bit worrying, isn't it? I think that coach could be working with athletes, could be working with minors again. We need all of our coaches to be really educated and informed around what is best practice, but also around various kinds of power that they have, and to be minimising harm and abuse.
Appreciate your time this evening, Holly. Thank you for joining us. That's Holly Thorpe, a Professor of Sport and Gender at the University of Waikato. 13 minutes after 5, kia ora tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Immigration New Zealand is investigating concerns some businesses with accredited employer status are exploiting migrant workers. RNZ's reported on the cases of dozens of Chinese migrant workers left jobless and out of pocket after paying thousands of dollars for work visas, only to be dismissed by their employer shortly after arriving. Most have come to Aotearoa on the Accredited Employer Work Visa Scheme. Now, that's a fast-track program that allows companies to apply for accreditation as long as they meet certain criteria, including being financially sound and having a history of complying with immigration and employment law. Immigration New Zealand's General Manager Richard Owen joins us now. Kia ora, Richard. How many employers are you investigating?
Yeah, hi Lisa. So at the moment we're looking at 53 employers to do with the Accredited Employer Work Visa, and I think it's really important to say here, first of all, we really feel for the migrants in this situation. They're the ones being exploited, and that's really key, and we take that very seriously. The other aspect is the vast majority of employers in New Zealand do the right thing, and they do abide by employment laws and the standards within the Immigration Act. So we're looking at 53 employers at the moment, and they're under active investigation at this stage.
What are the allegations, broadly?
So what's played out here, particularly with this particular situation, is individuals paying what are some quite significant sums of money, anywhere from 14,000 New Zealand dollars up to over $30,000 to an overseas agent. Now, that may be a bad actor, somebody who's not actually really a licensed immigration agent. They're taking a large sum of money for these people. They're come to New Zealand on the promise of, a brighter future and having a job. They arrive in New Zealand, they're collected from the airport, they're provided accommodation, which actually ultimately they pay for, and then they may even not get to the workplace, or when they do get to the workplace, they're dismissed in a relatively short space of time. And that's really, really concerning, because we're seeing those migrants being exploited, and we're obviously considering here whether or not employers may be complicit at this stage. We're in the early stages of investigation, but whether the employers are complicit here, but also whether or not we're even looking at people trafficking, and they're really serious allegations.
Okay, so in terms of the companies here, talking about the bad actors or the agencies offshore, is the suspicion that the companies here get a cut of those fees and there's just a churn? They get the fees, the workers come, they dismiss them, get more workers, more fees, and they're making money from basically a scam?
Yeah, look, we're at the very early stages of investigation, and just to be upfront, I'd rather not comment on the specifics of that, so obviously we want to maintain the integrity of the investigation as well. That will certainly be something that we'll be looking at as part of the investigations, but yeah, just too early to say, and obviously we need to protect the integrity of those investigations as well. But we have
understand, but that is the allegation of some of the workers, so it is a claim that you are investigating and a concern that you have.
Absolutely, yeah. And as I say, we've got to go through the burden of proof about whether employers have been complicit in these situations, and that's part of what our investigations will be looking at as well.
Are you proactively auditing these accredited employees?
Yes, we are. So as you mentioned just at the opening there, there's a range of pre-accreditation checks we expect employers to meet, but there's also a range of post-accreditation checks. So at the moment, we're actually carrying out checks on around about 15%, 15% of...
so how many have you actually completed, Richard?
So far, just over 430 accreditation checks, and we've got just under 1,500 on the way as well. So a really significant number, heading towards around about 2,000 checks with employers. And as you mentioned, things like looking at financial statements to demonstrate financial viability, evidence of how those offshore recruitment agents actually how the migrant employees were paid. So there's a range of things that we check with those employers to make sure they're meeting their obligations.
Okay, so of the 430 accredited employers you have checked, have you found any of them to be, dodgy?
Unfortunately, I haven't got that information in front of me at the moment, Lisa, but happily get that to you offline. But certainly, if there are anything here from whether it's part of the investigation we're undertaking now or just looking through those post-accreditation checks, some of the things we can do is if we do find that employers haven't met the necessary obligations that they should meet, we can suspend their accreditation or even remove it, actually revoke it completely. So we take that very seriously, and as I say, particularly as part of this set of investigations into these 53 employers at the moment, if we find the employers have been complicit, we will very seriously consider revoking their accreditation.
Okay, how many accreditations have you revoked since the scheme came to be?
So since the scheme came to be, and acknowledging that we have just commenced the actual accreditation, the post-accreditation work, we've suspended one and revoked one, and we've got 16 more that we're considering revocation or suspension for. Now that number, obviously, the further we do accreditation checks, that number may increase, but again, that's part of the actual post-accreditation checks we do, and we will look very seriously at that with this investigation we've got on at the moment.
And to be clear, Richard, the 16 that you're looking at revoking, that is outside of the other 53 that you have suspicions about that you are investigating?
That's correct, yep.
Okay. Is it too easy to get accreditation?
Oh, no, I wouldn't say that by any means. Actually, the accreditation employer work visa was put into place by the government to actually help protect migrant exploitation, so that an employer has to go through an accreditation process. And as I say, the vast majority of New Zealand employers do the right thing. But for those where we do see them, where we do see poor behaviour, then we will revoke that accreditation, which means they're no longer able to employ migrants moving forwards.
One of the issues seems to be 90-day terminations, right? Some of the workers coming in don't realise that these clauses are in there. In fact, some of them aren't even in the contracts, but they're exercising a 90-day termination anyway. Are you keeping records of how long these workers are employed, their reasons for departure, and whether the employing company has used a 90-day termination?
Yeah, those are things that we'll look at as part of our investigation as well.
When you say look at it, Richard, do you mean you're going to look at starting to keep records so you can see a pattern of behaviour?
Yeah, this is information that the employees will be expected to keep anyway, Lisa. So this is information that as we go through that accreditation process and also the investigations we're doing, we would expect the employees to already hold that information when we seek it from them as well.
Appreciate your time, Richard. That's Richard Owen, who's Immigration New Zealand's General Manager. The government's laid bare the huge shortages in the country's health workforce and its plan to fix them. The plan, developed with health agencies Te Whatu Order and Māori Health Authority Te Akawhai Order, seeks to address the shortfall by doing more to train and retain staff and attract international talent. Here's political reporter Giles Dexter.
The Health Minister won't call it a crisis, but she admits New Zealand's health workforce is under pressure. It's already 8,000 workers short, and an additional 1,600 will be needed every year for the next 10 years to keep up with New Zealand's anticipated population growth. Nurses, midwives, doctors, pharmacists, anaesthetists, all of them are needed.
Just like in medicine, you can't start the treatment until you've got the diagnosis right. So we need to know what our gaps are. Some of them are confronting, but until we do that, we can't make the progress we need to fill them.
The government's health workforce plan sets out what will happen in the education and immigration spaces to address the shortfall. It covers things the government can do over the next year, such as more Earn While You Learn programs, a big push for overseas recruitment, and streamlining pathways for Māori and Pacific workers. Te Whatu Order's Chief People Officer Andrew Slater says the plan's been developed over the last year, with input from the frontline and from unions.
The focus is on how do we retain our current workforce, how do we train in New Zealand and make health a really appealing place for New Zealanders to come and work, and then 3, how do we supplement that with our internationally recruited workforce.
The Health Minister says while research on workforce gaps had been done before, something on this scale could only happen because of the merged health entity.
There are a number of actions we can take now that we couldn't take when we had 20 PHBs competing against each other for staff. In that old system, it was nobody's responsibility to address the training pipeline. Now we recognise that is the health system's responsibility and we're working hard on it.
But National's health spokesperson Dr. Shane Moretti says it's all too little too late.
There are some short-term things that really need to be done, but, maybe they should have thought about that before they were so late coming to the Day 1 pathway for nurses. So I think they've been the masters of their own mistakes here.
He wants to see much more done to stop workers from heading overseas or leaving the sector entirely. But Dr. Aisha Verrill insists retaining staff is a big part of the workforce plan, and immediate steps are being taken to offer more well-being support for current staff.
That means everything from when you're on night duty, we'll now make sure that there is nutritious food available for you. It means that when something distressing happens at work, we need to be there with the appropriate debrief for you.
The Executive Director of the Association of Salaried Medical Specialists, Sarah Dalton, is pleased to see the data and some accountability, but wants to see more action on competitive salaries and better conditions.
We absolutely need to train more of our own here and encourage them to stay. But as we speak, the salaries being offered in Australia are just so much higher than what is offered in New Zealand, and as far as we can see, there is no interest in even attempting to close that gap.
The government says it's a problem decades in the making, but it's giving itself just 1 year to get these fixes off the ground.
Giles Dexter reporting there, 23 minutes after 5, and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Whakaaro, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. Do get in touch. A disgraced elite coach banned from coaching for 10 years for the mistreatment of athletes. Why can't we seem to get this right? And also the exploitation of migrant workers. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or the email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. A little later in the program, we're going to be talking about the price of the Waiheke ferry. Let us know your reckons on that one too. I'm sure you've got a few. It's time to go to the headlines now. Evie's standing by. Ko Evie anō tēnei. Athletics New Zealand says it's aware of reports that famed athletics coach Jeremy McCall is being investigated by the police after admitting harassing and mistreating athletes, including minors. A professor of sport and gender at the University of Waikato, Holly Thorpe, told Checkpoint male coaches using their power over female athletes is all too common and real change is needed. Immigration New Zealand's General Manager Richard Owen says 53 employers are being investigated amid allegations migrant workers are being exploited. Dozens of Chinese say they've been left jobless and out of pocket after paying thousands of dollars for work visas, only to be fired shortly after arriving. The government's new health workforce plan estimates the country will need 1,600 more nurses, midwives, doctors, pharmacists and anaesthetists every year until 2032 to keep up with population growth. Ministers have set out a 6-point plan to improve recruitment and retention, including more earn-as-you-learn schemes. A rush to beat changes to the Clean Car Discount scheme drove record new vehicle sales in June. The Motor Industry Association says 23,560 new vehicles were registered, 10,000 up on May, and nearly double the number seen a year ago. And in the US, 4 people have died in a shooting in Philadelphia, with 2 children aged 2 and 13 injured. This is the 185th day of 2023, and the United States has seen at least 339 mass shootings so far. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic in the Coromandel, there are reports of a slip on State Highway 25 southbound near the intersection with Whiripoa Beach Road. In Taranaki, because of a fire, State Highway 45 is now closed at Oprenaki between Wilson and Heafy Roads. And in Southland, State Highway 99 is expected to stay closed overnight because of flooding between Ryle-Bush, Wallacestown Road and Lawnville Roundabout. Our next traffic news and headlines are at about 20 to 6.
Kia ora, Eho. After 9 months of being in limbo, the All Whites have a new head coach. Darren Baisley will take New Zealand's top men's football side through the 2026 World Cup, as well as coaching the country's under-23 side for next year's Paris Olympic campaign. Baisley, a former assistant coach for the side, has been filling in since Danny Hay left the top job last year. We're joined by sports reporter Felicity Reid. So why did it take New Zealand football so long to basically promote him from within? He was already there, right?
He was already there. It's been a bit of a messy appointment process, but wasn't helped by New Zealand football's secrecy at the start. They threw around a term of preferred candidate, and we know that this person has actually fallen through. So there were 4 people for the role, and we know that Baisley was originally overlooked. But as this process was playing out, the All Whites actually had games on the international calendar, so they needed to be playing and they needed a coach. So Baisley came in as the caretaker coach over that period, and that was not for 1 but for 2 international windows that he was called on for that. And as you could sense near the end of that second window, he was starting to feel the frustration with the process as well. He said that it was unsettling for him and his family not knowing what was next for him. But they seem to have come to terms here, and New Zealand football's Andrew Pragnell is happy with the end result.
What was a defining factor in the process was he actually got to do the job, and in doing so exceeded and performed beyond their expectations in those 4 games across the March and June windows. So longer than we would have liked, but in hindsight I think we'll probably redesign the process going forward to try and ensure we get some of this kind of experience of someone actually doing the job.
So that was that turning point of those games of actually having him in control. That seemed to move him up New Zealand football's preferred candidate list. And it was also his communication with head office, is what Pragnell said today, was working in his favour as well. In the past, they've had some issues between the communication with the coach and I guess with New Zealand football as a bigger entity. So those things were working in Baisley's favour. He's also quite popular with some of the younger players that he's actually coached at the under-20 level already. And there will be that crossover between the under-23 role and the All White senior role, and Pragnell sees that as an advantage for them to have him in both of those spaces. He told me it wasn't under financial constraint that they've decided to do that. It was actually for progress of the program.
Okay, let's stick with football. So the All Whites' claims of racism in their last game against Qatar, there's an update of that?
There is. So New Zealand Football lodged a query with the FIFA Disciplinary Committee to get some information and to actually get this disciplinary committee to look into the racism from that game. That was the game that the All Whites took the stance and didn't come back after half-time after their defender, Michael Boxall, allegedly got some racial abuse from an opposition player. As we've discussed previously, Qatar has also come out post-game and raised their own issues around racism. So the information was that New Zealand Football wanted this match to be looked into. They've put in a request with the FIFA Disciplinary Committee. They've come back and acknowledged the request. That's actually as far as it's got. So Andrew Pragnell says that they're actually waiting to hear about what happens for the next step.
Thank you, Felicity. That's our sports reporter. This can has been kicked down the road too many times. Green MP Chloe Swarbrick represents Auckland Central and wants to know why the government still hasn't brought the Waiheke ferry service into the public transport model, meaning cheaper fares for punters. And she's asked for a please explain from the new Transport Minister, David Parker. Passengers are now paying up to $59 for a return ticket after a price hike came into effect on the weekend. All other public transport is subsidised, but Fuller's has a carve-out to run on a purely commercial basis to Waiheke. MP Chloe Swarbrick joins us now. Kia ora, Chloe. What do you think of the price of a ticket on the Waiheke ferry?
So, well, what I'd say is that for far too long, in excess of 10 years, as a result of the legacy of a pretty inexplicable decision made by the former Minister of Transport under the former National Government, Stephen Joyce, actually against all advice based on a 300-plus page OAA that I managed to get a hold of about a year or two ago, that those who live on Waiheke, which is not a small population, it's approximately 11,000 people, are subjected to being the sole route in the country that is identified as integral to the public transport network, the Auckland's Regional Public Transport Plan 2018, but it is excluded from the public transport operating model. What that means is that it's not regulated and subsidised as all other public transport is in the country, and of course that understandably causes quite substantive furore for constituents on the island, because we end up with incredibly expensive, arguably actually, based on conversations with Waiheke Local Board, one of the most expensive ferry routes in the entire world, looking at comparable routes.
So what should happen?
Well, what should happen is what should have happened several years ago, and I've been on successive ministers about precisely this, which is to bring that Waiheke ferry route into the public transport operating model. For the public transport nerds amongst us, they may be aware that there is also likely to soon be an evolution from the PTOM into the Sustainable Public Transport Framework, which will enable, for example, Auckland Council to directly run these services, but we won't get into that for the time being. But what it will do is require Fuller's to effectively open the books and enable Auckland Transport to negotiate regulation and subsidies, particularly for commuters. This is a power which Auckland Transport actually asked the former Minister of Transport, Phil Twyford, for back in 2019. We managed to finally get a commitment from the Honourable Michael Rudd back in June of 2022 after, again, a substantial amount of work and lobbying with commuters and those on the island, the local board, Auckland Transport and otherwise. And we were told at that point in time that it would take approximately 6 months to begin this ordering council process. However, we're now obviously over a year beyond that time frame, and I've been asking and OAAing for the advice that has been commissioned, and was told that that advice would be put on Waka Kotahi's website at the end of June. Obviously, we're now in July, and we're still without that information.
Chloe, for people listening, this sounds like a bureaucracy soup, right? And it's enough to make your brain explode. So the short version of it is, can the government order Fuller's into this program, this public transport model, and therefore allow people to have subsidised fares for the trip to Waiheke? Do they have the power to do it?
The simple answer is yes. The government can do that.
So why do you think they aren't doing it?
Well, based on my conversations with successive ministers, there is some concern that if there isn't a business case for making that decision as a result of the legislative framework obviously inherited from the former national government, that there is the potential that the government could potentially be sued. So making sure that all of the I's are dotted and T's are crossed is important. But again, this is where I've been asking for a constant please explain and transparency throughout the process, because at the very least what my constituents deserve is transparency and accountability from decision makers who have let them down for 10 plus years on this.
What's to stop the company operating the service, currently Suez, if you bring them into the public transport model? What if they throw their hands up and say, meh, don't want to do this service anymore because it's not worth it?
Well, the public transport operating model sets up a framework through which negotiations are undertaken through local authorities, so it would be within the remit of Auckland Council to then negotiate the provision of these services. And I must say that despite all of the challenges that we've been facing with the provision of full services and obviously the cost kind of increases in other ways to constituents over the past few years, that I do have a pretty good working relationship with them and with Mike Horn, who have been really responsive to the needs within obviously their commercial imperative. And actually what they're saying to me as well is that they want some clarity from what the government is going to do here, because without that they can't even make commercial investment decisions. So all roads really lead back to the government doing this. And as I shared in my letter today to our new Minister of Transport, David Parker, but also our Minister for Auckland, the Deputy Prime Minister, the Honourable Callander, Balun, it's time to get on with it. We've only got 6 weeks left before the House rises for election year. And we can do it.
So, Chloe, quick answer, please, because we're out of time. If $59 is too much for a return ticket, what's the fair price? Name your number.
I'm not going to pull a number out of thin air, but what I am going to say is that with transparency and an opening of the books, we can calculate something that is far fairer. And with currently the most expensive comparable ferry route in the developed world, it's time to get on with something that is far more affordable for my constituents.
Thanks for your time, Chloe. That is Chloe Swarbrick, Auckland Central MP, there on the Waiheke ferry and the price. It is 25 minutes away from 6. Kia mau tōne mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. It is time for the business news. Ko taku hoa I nei ko Anand Zaki. Anand, business sentiment remains deeply pessimistic.